The Aesir didn't just chain a monster. You see, they betrayed their own loyal companion. I want to take you back to a time when Asgard was at its absolute zenith, a golden age where the sun never seemed to set on the power of the gods. The halls of Valhalla hummed with the pride of 1,000 victories, and the deities of the north walked with the confidence of those who believe they have mastered fate itself. They were unaware, actually totally unaware, that the seeds of their total destruction were already playing at their feet, nipping at their heels with innocent curiosity. Look closely into the shadows of Odin's great hall. Whisper. There, amidst those massive golden pillars, you wouldn't find a nightmare. Softly and warmly. Instead, you'd see a small, silver-furred pup, his tail wagging as he chased the hem of a god's cloak. Captivating. This was Fenrir in his youth, not the world eater of legend, but a creature of bright eyes and a playful spirit. Gravely. To most of the Aesir, however, every happy bark sounded like a death knell. Solemnly. They didn't see a pet or a ward. They saw a ticking clock. The atmosphere in Asgard was thick with a tragic irony, you know? As the pup grew at an impossible rate, every god looked at him with a growing cold dread, their whispers filled with the dark words of the Norns. Respectfully, only one among them, the brave Tyr, actually dared to extend a hand in friendship. The high stakes were invisible to the young wolf, but to the gods, they were absolute. They believed that by binding this creature, they were saving the world from a predestined end. In reality, I will show you how through their fear and their broken vows, the gods were actually carving their own gravestones. Gray, deep in the heart of the iron wood, where the trees blew black sap in the sun, but it never truly rises, the gods found the fruit of Loki's secret union. From the children, each a nightmare in its own way, waited there in the gloom. I want you to imagine the scene. The All-Father, Odin, standing over that trembling brood, his mind racing with the whispers of a prophecy, one that predicted these children would one day feast upon his very life. Without a second thought, the great serpent, Jormungandr, was cast into the frigid depths of the ocean, to be forgotten by the light. The girl, Hel, half living and half rotting, was banished to the frozen wastes of the underworld, to rule over the dishonored dead. But you see, when it came to the smallest of the three, a silver-furred pup named Fenrir, the gods, they hesitated. They saw a flicker of something in his eyes that was not yet malice, and in their ultimate arrogance, they actually believed they could shape his destiny. They brought him home, to the golden halls of Asgard, intending to keep their enemy close, right where they could watch him grow. I want you to picture those halls, where laughter usually echoed and mead flowed like rivers. But as the wolf grew, well, so did the silence. The gods began to avoid him, their whispers trailing off whenever the sound of his paws scraped against the stone. To them, he was a ticking clock, a living omen of their own destruction. Heroically, yet amidst this sea of cold glares and fearful hearts, one god stood defiant. Grandly, Tyr, the Lord of Justice and the bravest of the Aesir, refused to treat the creature as a monster. Softly, with admiration, while the others recoiled, I see Tyr stepping forward every evening, his arms laden with raw meat, offering not just sustenance, but a rare, genuine warmth. Warmly, Tyr would sit beside the growing wolf, looking into those golden eyes, not with the suspicion of an executioner, but with the affection, of a brother. Mystically, for a brief time there was a strange, deceptive peace in Asgard. Solemnly, a war god and a world breaker, sharing meals and moments of quiet in the shadow of a dark future. They were bound by a trust that felt unbreakable, a friendship that seemed to defy the very stars. But even as Tyr smiled, the other gods were retreating into the shadows to forge something else. Something cold, something cruel, and something that would test Tyr's loyalty to its ultimate bloody limit. For you see, the gods were about to realize that the pup they had invited into their home was growing far faster than any of them had anticipated. And soon, no fence in Asgard would be enough to hold him. The growth of Fenrir was not some slow creep of time. No, it was a violent unfolding of destiny. I suspect that even Odin, with all his foresight, was just, he was unprepared for the speed at which that pup became a mountain of fur and shadow. Soon, you see, the golden streets of Asgard no longer echoed with the playful paws of a companion, but with the heavy, rhythmic thud of a predator. One that could look the gods in the eye without even tilting its head. You could see the shift in the halls of Valhalla, The laughter grew forced, the feasts felt colder. Every time the wolf yawned, revealing a maw that seemed large enough to swallow the very sun, the gods saw the end of their era reflected in his teeth. They began to realize that they weren't just raising a pet. They were housing a ticking clock. But you see, the gods of the North are as prideful as they are powerful. Schemingly, to show fear is to invite weakness, right? And so they cloaked their paranoia in the guise of sport. They gathered around the great wolf and spoke of his legendary strength, stroking his ego even as they plotted his imprisonment. They poured forth raiding, a chain of iron so heavy that it took several gods just to hold it across the grass. They told Fenrir it was a test of his might, a way for him to win total fame. I can almost see the wolf's tail wagging, a movement that likely felt like a gale force wind. He allowed them to bind him, his golden eyes shining with the simple desire to please his friends. But then, with one casual flex of his haunches, the iron screamed. Awestruck, Lading didn't just break, it shattered into 1,000 jagged prayers.
Fenrir barked with joy, a sound that shook the very roots of Yggdrasil. He thought it was a game, you see. But the gods, they were looking at those fragments of iron with a dawning horror. Intensely, they tried again, forging Dromi, a chain twice as thick and twice as cruel. Once more they challenged him. And once more the wolf laughed through his strength and snapped the metal like sun-dried twigs. The shards of Dromi flew through the air, embedding themselves in the earth. And in that moment, a terrible silence fell over Asgard. The gods realized that there was no metal forged by man or deity that could contain the fate they had invited into their home. The question that haunted their minds was no longer if he could be bound, but what price they would have to pay to find something, anything, that was stronger than a wolf's hunger. As the gods retreated into the shadows to consult the only beings capable of forging the impossible, they knew they were running out of time. Because you see, the next chain wouldn't be made of iron, and the cost of using it would be a debt paid in blood. Deep beneath the earth, in the lightless forges of Svartalfheim, you see, I want you to imagine the gods descending to meet the masters of the impossible. They did not ask the dwarves for iron or gold. No, they asked for a paradox. They needed a chain that was not a chain, something forged from the very fabric of things that do not exist.
I can tell you that the dwarves gathered the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. These are the 6 ingredients of Gleipnir. It looked like nothing more than a silken ribbon, soft and thin to the touch. Yet it was forged from the heavy weight of destiny itself. When the gods brought Fenrir to the desolate island of Lyngvi, you can almost feel the cold wind blowing off the black waters of Lake Umsvornir. They played it off as a game, a final test of the wolf's legendary strength. But Fenrir was no longer the playful creature who had once wandered the halls of Asgard. He was a mountain of fur and shadow, his eyes reflecting a growing suspicion of the divine. He looked at the thin silken cord and sensed the ancient magic woven into its fibers. I saw him grow still, his low growl shaking the very foundation of the island. He told the gods he would only allow them to bind him if one of them placed their hand in his jaws. A pledge of good faith, a guarantee that they were not leading him into a trap. I watched as silence fell for the gods. They looked at one another, their legendary bravery dissolving into the cowardice of those who know they are lying. Truly. They knew that once Gleipnir was fastened, the wolf would never be free again. Only one of them had the soul to step forward. Tur, the god of justice, the only one who had ever shown the wolf kindness, walked toward the beast. You have to understand the weight of this moment. Tur looked into the eyes of the creature he had raised and saw the flicker of a bond that was about to be severed. Forever. Without a word, he placed his right hand between the wolf's serrated teeth.
The gods bound Fenrir. The wolf struggled, his massive muscles rippling as he expected the ribbon to snap like the iron chains before it. But the more he fought, the tighter Gleipnir became. It bit into his fur, anchoring itself not just to his body, but to his very spirit. Darkly, Fenrir realized the betrayal in an instant. Solemnly, he looked at the gods, who began to laugh in their relief. All except for Tyr. Violent, in a sudden, visceral surge of fury, the wolf's jaws clamped shut. Shattering. The sound of bone shattering echoed across the island, followed by a silence more terrifying than any howl. Grim. In that moment, the trust of a loyal companion died, and the prophecy of the God-Slayer was sealed in blood. But as the gods celebrated their victory, they failed to realize one terrifying truth. Ominous. I can tell you that they hadn't just imprisoned a monster, they had created a nightmare that now had an eternity to nurture its hate. And you might think the story ends with the wolf in chains, but there was one detail the gods missed. One final act of cruelty that would ensure their world would one day burn. The binding was complete, but you see, the cruelty of Asgard was not yet satisfied. To ensure the wolf could never again snap those terrible jaws, the gods drove a sword through his mouth, the hilt resting on the lower jaw and the point piercing the roof of his palate. Pained. In that moment, the great wolf was silenced, but his agony flowed out in a constant foaming stream. Mystical. This is the River Von, a name that translates to expectation or hope. Well, a bitter irony for a creature whose only hope was now the end of all things. I want you to look closely at this moment, past the triumph of the gods and into the shadows of the cave where Fenrir remains. Actually, the fallout is absolute. Whaley. By treating a pup like a monster, they guaranteed he would become one. I will leave you with a haunting question that has echoed through the halls of lore for centuries. Was Fenrir always destined to destroy the world? Or did the gods create their own executioner through their cowardice? The myth of Fenrir is a warning about the self-fulfilling nature of prophecy, and the terrible cost of betraying those who once trusted us. He waits there still, deep in the dark, growing stronger not just on time, but
but on the mounting guilt of the gods who chose to chain him rather than love him. When the sun is finally swallowed and the stars vanish from the sky, it will not be a random act of malice. It will be a debt being paid in full. If you ever feel a chill when you look up at the moon, remember this. It is not the wolf we should feel, right? It is the chains we choose to forge. So, what do you think? Was Fenrir born to be a monster? Or did the gods leave him no other choice? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to uncover more stories of forgotten gods and legendary creatures, make sure to subscribe to Mythic Echoes. Until the next legend wakes, keep a watchful eye on the shadows.